Okay, welcome everybody to this webinar on urban waters, 21st century water and sanitation in the cities. I think we all live in cities and we know what problems of water are facing our cities, especially in the areas like our area, Turkey maybe to a certain extent, and Jordan which is located in an arid area, consider water as one of the threats to the existence of human habitation. And for that reason, all the people who lived in this area, the Bedouins who were traveling in the desert, knew how to conserve and how to manage water resources to the limit that it will contribute to the continuation of life. This conference is about that. So we will have 5 speakers. Two of them will speak on the global issues related to water and habitation. I say habitation because the way we plan and develop our cities always affects the way we manage our water resources. For instance, in Jordan, as I will tell you in a short time after that, we had a city which is spreading without any control over vast areas. The areas which were originally the recharge area of underground aquifer, and serving all these remotely placed single houses was a big problem for the water authorities, whoever they are, at first. And it was not also viable to connect every house on top of a hill with a pipe, because it would be too long and serving very few people. So the water is always becoming the concern of every household. And I think this is also everywhere in the world, even in the most water abundant places. I was in Germany once at a water utility company, and I asked them, what is the major problem you are facing? He said, football. What is the relation of football to water? He said, in the halftime, everybody runs to the toilet. So our pumps are becoming incapable of supplying the water pressure which we intend to supply to all the households. Things like that, they may look funny, but they are part of our life and part of our concerns when it comes to water. In this seminar, we will have 5 speakers, as I said. The first speaker is Prof. Dr. Tony Wong, from the Monash University in Australia. He will speak about water for livability for future cities. Our lady contributor, Panchali Saikia, she's from Sweden, from Sewage. She will speak on water and sanitation services in growing cities. My colleague and friend Dursun Yildiz from the Hydropolitics Academy will speak about Istanbul as a case study, what problems are facing the city, and what plans are there in the hands of the administrations. Uh, I will be number 4, and I will speak about the case study of Amman, Jordan. Then, last but not least, uh, we will have Leandro Miyazaki. He's from Brazil. He will speak about the case study of Sao Paulo, which is one of the biggest metropolis in Brazil, and one of the major 10 metropolises around the world. So I welcome you all again, and I will give the floor to our friend Tony Wong. Please.
Thank you very much, Kamal. I'm delighted to be here. Good evening from me. Good morning to some of you, and good afternoon to the rest of you. I would like to first share my screen.
Yeah, it's okay.
May I ask everybody who is not presenting?
Okay, so thank you for all of you for muting. I would like to present some of the work that I've been involved in for nearly 20 years now in Australia, really looking at the concept of water sensitive urban design or water sensitive city, but I'm going to present it in the context of water for livability and how we could transform water management in cities, whether they are developing cities or in the developing world or in the developed world, how the trend in water management is very much towards integrated water management, and that the desired outcomes are not just about subsistence of water, but also for water for livability, to improve the livability of inhabitants. And I'll start with this trend in that we're now moving to a stage where whenever we look at issues of cities, whether it is about energy, whether it's about transport or water, we find ourselves looking at the performance of our city through multiple drivers, multiple criteria, and how our city perform under multiple scenarios. And three of the emerging themes in the water management is really a question of sustainable water management, but also water systems that are resilient to change, whether it is climate-induced or demographic-induced, or change in terms of the emergence of digital technology, and so on. How resilient are our water system, urban water system, to those changes? And finally, how do we manage water to improve the broader livability of our cities? And they have different contexts and emphasis. But the best way we can think about that is that whenever we think about sustainability, we think about the carrying capacity or the ecological footprint of our city from a water perspective, in some case from a ecological perspective, environmental perspective, energy perspective. But really, when we talk about sustainability, we talk about the carrying capacity of the environment we live in, whether it is within the boundary of our cities or about looking at the capacity of the surrounding environment that supports our city. When we look at resilient, we often think of it as coping capacity, our ability to adapt, to withstand, recover, say, from climatic extremes. And we look at livability, we actually look at the comfort capacity, the capacity of our systems to support the many characteristics that influence our life in cities. Some of them are essential and some of them are desirable. And in a lot of our research, when we think about livability, we often think about the Maslow hierarchy of needs, subsistence needs. And then when we have those subsistence needs, we actually seek for greater amenity, water that will bring us happiness and joy and so on and so forth. Now, that research has actually been going on for a long time, and this is a paper published in 2012 using standard metrics of measures of livability. Compare many cities in this work done by Professor Newton, again from Australia. And you can see on the x-axis is the ecological footprint in terms of the ecosystem services that city draws. And on the vertical axis is a measure of livability, the livability index by the economic unit. And it's quite interesting when you look at this data and look at the cities whereby you find that Australian cities are actually clustered to the top right, in that many Australian cities, in fact, pride themselves as being very livable. In fact, Melbourne, where I live, has been consistently #1 or #2 most livable cities in the world. But we pay a price for that, in that if you look at our ecological footprint, it's also quite high. You can compare some of the other cities. American cities, for instance, in here, they are still very livable, but in fact, they have even higher ecological footprint. And that has a lot to do with American cities being quite spread out, relying a lot on vehicles and car transport for moving and so on. But and I haven't got to the water side, but it gives you a sense that in the strive for livability, many of the traditional way that we develop our cities have led to quite increased ecological footprint. So there is an ecological or environmental impact in pursuing livability. If you look at the Middle Eastern cities, for some of those cities, and they're mainly in Dubai and in that part of the world, the livability is again reasonably high, but lower than Australian cities or United States cities in the US, but still have very high ecological footprint. A good example I often use is, for instance, in Dubai, whereby you can go skiing in Dubai, except that it uses an amazing amount of energy to create the ski fields in a highly air-conditioned environment. And then you look at European cities, and they seem to strike a better balance between achieving good livability and a lower footprint. And then there's a whole bunch of it down here, cities in the developing world, whereby they're still developing. And they have very low ecological footprint, but equally quite low livability. And a lot of the work that we do from a water perspective is really to ask the question of how would we work with cities, whether in the developed world or in the developing world, to try and progressively transform those cities to become much more sustainable, much more resilient, and much more livable. The cities that I've worked in the developed world are mainly on the right of the diagram, and we are trying to transform them to much more sustainable, lower ecological footprint while maintaining their livability. While the cities that I've worked in the developing world, and I've been working on quite a number of slums, for instance, in Indonesia and in Fiji, the question we have is how do you help them transform from a very low livability, but low ecological footprint to a higher level of livability, higher level of water services without introducing huge ecological footprint as a consequence. And the way we do this over quite a number of years of research, but in 2009, we published the concept of a water sensitive city. And we basically say that there are 3 basic principles that would guide us in how we would transform to become more sustainable, more resilient, and more livable. And those three basic principles are actually quite simple, but they manifest themselves quite differently depending on the context, or whether you're in an arid city or whether you're in a tropical city. It would manage itself quite differently, and our water management strategy will also be quite different. But the principles are the same. And the first principle, of course, is that we should look at our cities as water supply catchments, meaning that there are water resources within our city that we should harness before we even consider harnessing water resources from outside the city. It's so different from the way that we manage our city from a water supply perspective, that we often build dams that are away from the city and transport that water into our city. And in many cases, we would use that water once and then discharge that as a wastewater into some receiving water. The concept of turning that around to actually look at our city itself as a water supply catchment has got significant implication in our planning laws and how we actually start to look after water that runs off our city the minute we think of our city as a water supply catchment. The second principle is that we can design our cities to provide ecosystem services, meaning that the built environment functions that we can build environmental functions to our city design. And I'll give you some examples of that. A nature-based solution in water management within cities are emerging as one of those issues. The third principle is the city comprising water-sensitive communities, in that in the end of the day, it is a social capital of the city that will determine how sustainable, how resilient, how livable that city is. The social capital often is viewed in three layers. The water literacy of our community, whether our community actually understand the challenges of water, where water comes from, where wastewater go to, the impact of their lifestyle on the water environment and the water quality in our environment, how water literate is our community. The second level is how do our professionals, you and I, do we have the tools and the knowledge to innovate and to actually look at better water innovation? And the third level is, does our government have the right policy to enable innovation, or are their institutions and policy based on a highly fragmented means of water governance? So there are those three principles, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail. For instance, when we think about cities as water supply catchments, we are really espousing the fact that there is a whole diversity of water sources in our city. Not any one of them will solve our problem completely, but the combination of them can actually build greater resilience and sustainability. The concept of water recycling and fit-for-purpose use of water is now emerging as really important in how we manage urban water. There is no reason for using drinking water to be flushing the toilet, watering our garden, washing our cars, or used in industry that doesn't require potable standard. Stormwater harvesting, stormwater that rains in our city could be managed as a resource and can provide intermittent supply to our city. The way that we replenish our groundwater system whenever there is ample resources, when it rains, for instance, is a really important concept of how we maintain sustainability in our groundwater system and to manage the situation that there will be time when we will over-abstract groundwater, but there will also be time where we should be replenishing that groundwater. And the source of replenishment could be anything from rainwater, it could be from recycled water, and in many parts of the world, you can see that happening now. And ultimately, the concept of a water circular economy, that water could be used multiple times in the city in a way that is fit for purpose. The second, of course, is the cities can provide ecosystem services. And in this case, we are saying that it is time that we embed nature into the design of our city, that we shouldn't design our city to exclude natural systems, you see now a lot of the developed world are trying to transform their cities to greener, to deconstruct concrete channels and bring back natural channels, to plant more trees such that it can cool the city. You know, that all of those things, we find that if we actually start to think about cities as providing ecosystem services, we would embed into our urban design many of these ecological systems, such as ecological landscapes, corridors for biodiversity, safe passage for floods, enhancing the microclimate of cities, using nature to cleanse stormwater, for instance, such that that water can then be managed as a resource. Looking at how we rehabilitate our waterways and introduce natural systems and natural green corridors for flood conveyance, flood mitigation, and so on. And finally, the third principle is the cities comprising water-sensitive communities. As I mentioned before, it's about a water-literate community. It's about industry and the professions that's equipped with the right tools and knowledge to innovate. And it's about government creating the legislative and regulatory enabling environment for water-sensitive city transformation. Let me just give you some examples now. In the interest of time, I'll run through it very quickly. Cities as water supply catchment. Look at what Singapore is doing. Singapore, being an island city, very poor in terms of their water resource, have now introduced a strategy of what they call the 4 taps, in that there are 4 sources of water that they will tap on in an integrated water system. And one of those that they have moved a lot in, which I've worked with them a lot, is really the notion of how they can harness all the local stormwater in Singapore. Being a tropical city, a dense city, often you find that the traditional way that we manage high intensity rainfall is to try and channel that into the sea as quickly as possible. While now Singapore is transforming itself to enable that every drop of rainfall would be captured and basically harnessed as a resource. And I encourage you to have a look at what they're doing in that sense. Another project that I was involved in is in China, and how we have now built an Internet of Things platform to enable them to manage their polders in a way whereby their canals are also used for water storage, but at the same time, we are able to monitor by looking at radars and looking at future rainfall scenarios, that we can then lower those canals during times of imminent high intensity rainfall and use the same infrastructure, in this case, a lot of their canals, for both water storage and flood management through an Internet of Things platform. And coupled with that is the platform to monitor the water quality in those canals and make sure that it is healthy, it is flushed well, it has good aeration, because they are now also being a storage for water supply in the city of Kunshan that we're working in. Let's look at cities providing ecosystem services, nature-based solutions. And you find that the United Nations have in fact come up with quite a series of good guidelines on what ecosystems are. And I just want to run through, this is a diagram from that report on natural infrastructure for water management by the UN Water. And really, nature-based solutions is a combination of how we look at nature conservation, how we look at restoration, nature restoration, natural rehabilitation of natural systems, and biomimicry. I'll start with the most fundamental in terms of nature conservation and restoration. There's a lot of work now done to try and conserve nature, to return pasture land into forests, to restore natural wetlands because of the ecosystems that they provide. And there are many countries in a large scale are looking at huge conservation projects. Not a lot to do with urban, but I wanted to bring that up in terms of providing you with different perspective of what nature-based solutions would look like. As you get closer to the city, you find that there's a lot of work to look at restoration of nature or rehabilitation of nature, a really subtle difference Restoring nature is actually to bring it back to its pristine condition. Rehabilitation of nature really understand that nature is changed because the land use has changed, whether it's because of human settlements, urbanizations, and you can see efforts to restore mangrove swamps is getting very popular. But at the same time, you look at the picture to your right at the bottom, efforts to reduce erosion is really a rehabilitation strategy, because the cause of the erosion quite often is related to the change in catchment land use that increases the velocity and the hydrograph characteristic that ultimately cause a lot of that erosion. And finally, an area that I'm particularly interested in, have spent a lot of my time looking at, is looking at what is nature-based solution in an urban environment. And that is related to rehabilitation, biomimicry. And these are some of the projects that could start to think about how nature-based solutions are now embedded into the urban form to provide ecosystem services. Most of these pictures are actually in Melbourne in projects I've done, whereby we've used constructed wetlands for harvesting stormwater, but at the same time, those wetlands are part of architectural pieces in the city itself. We are now bringing ecosystems into the city through the practice of biomimicry, to understand what are the key natural systems and processes that improves the quality of water, improves temperature in the city, but then to mimic that and introduce that through good architectural design into buildings. And finally, water-sensitive communities, a project I'm involved in is again back in Singapore, how we can now introduce a whole system of regulatory and administrative reform to put the right policies into place, harnessing and building capacity of local professions with the right tools, with the right research to actually start to build local capacity for innovation. And this is a project that's completed now, that we've actually started to implement a whole framework, a holistic framework that builds the natural capital, the social capital of the city of Singapore in this case. In recent times, a lot of those concepts have actually led us to ask the question, can we adapt the concept of water-sensitive cities and the three principles that we have into the developing world? And we have now done that in terms of how we are looking at strengthening the delivery of WASH in slums, urban slums. And the key point here is that the health of the environment has a direct connection to the health of the people that live in those environments, those slums. And informal settlements of the world, in fact, are often living in the most inhospitable environment, whereby the environment itself is highly contaminated. One of the things that really struck me when I started visiting some of these projects in an urban environment is that for still a long time now, the delivery of traditional water and sanitation and hygiene services to an urban environment is based on concepts that are very suited to rural environments. The notion, for instance, of pit latrines and septic tanks are based on very fundamental assumption that the environment has the assimilative capacity to assimilate the waste that is generated by those communities. In an urban slum, when the density is very high, the environmental capacity to assimilate that waste is completely exhausted. And what we see now is the progressive contamination of the very environment that these people live in. And the oral fecal contamination directly impacts on the gastrointestinal health of people. And we are looking at now seeing that one of the main causes of diarrhea, pneumonia, and a lot of gastrointestinal infections are due to oral fecal contamination. Where children play, where people recreate, where they cook, the pathway of pathogen contaminations are actually through the very environment that they live in. And it is not new, and many of you have seen this diagram of looking at where fecal contamination pathways could be delivered. But there are multiple pathways for this. For instance, flooding and constant flooding of those settlements is a very significant pathway for fecal contamination, mainly because the soil is saturated. It has no capacity to assimilate waste. Also, flooding brings contamination from other parts of the catchment into those settlements. Of course, sanitation, poor public health, open defecations are significant source of contamination. Water quality in terms of the environment that many of these people actually recreate or bathe in. And if they are contaminated, that's another pathway to their contamination. Water sources, again, is of course a source of contamination, but the opportunity that if we actually introduce the concept of water-sensitive urban design, that a lot of water could be harnessed as a resource if managed well, that can actually start to introduce local economies in terms of productive landscapes for those communities as well. Our first project using that concept is the RISE program, the Revitalizing Informal Settlements and the Environment program in Indonesia, in the city of Makassar. Here's a picture of that, whereby this is what they do every day during the monsoon months. The citizens actually wade through contaminated water because at best they have septic tanks. Sometimes they just have drop toilets. That is highly contaminated because the soil is just saturated. So we were able to demonstrate the introduction of nature-based solution. And here's
I'm Bambang Susanto.
Here's a short video.
And I am currently in Batuan neighborhood in the city of Makassar, Indonesia. I'm here to inaugurate a pilot project that shows how green technology can benefit the communities. It is part of revitalizing informal settlement and their environment, or we call it RISE, that ADB support through the Urban Climate Change Resilience Trust Fund. In the past, this area suffered from poor drainage system. It had limited solid waste management facilities, leading to frequent flooding, reaching up to 1.5 meters. The condition of roads were poor, limiting the mobility of its residents. To address these issues, the project constructed wetlands, biofiltration gardens, stormwater harvesting, local sanitation system, and also access roads. What is unique about the project? This is that it applies the concept of building with nature, in which the intervention mimic natural system. Compared to its centralized system, these interventions require less operation and maintenance management. Its adaptive ability also enhances resilience. ADB believes this nature-based solution can deliver a significantly higher level of positive impact across the full spectrum of population well-being by providing fresh water, healthy diet, and sustainable food system. In this regard, the solution also underpins the Sustainable Development Goals. The project also helped the government, together with the community and stakeholders, to plan the infrastructure through a participatory planning process. This approach empowers the residents with the knowledge to manage this infrastructure by themselves. Batua residents enjoy a cleaner environment, better mobility, and also access to clean water. I spoke to Ms. Suneti, a housewife living in Batua with her family.
Sebelum ada proyek SISE masuk, terus terang kita banjir. Tiap tahunnya itu kita beli titian-titian bambu. Per orangnya itu kita kumpulkan 100 lebih satu orang.
Ibu senang?
Senang sekali. Karena ada program RISE ini. Kita sudah bisa menjalan, Pak.
This project is a showcase of a successful multi-stakeholders partnership. It brings together central local governments, universities, civil society organizations, other development partners, and of course, the local communities. Together with this partner, ADB will continue to monitor how these efforts will improve human and environmental health in the long run. Through this project, ADB is keen to show that nature-based infrastructure is a viable option to enhance water supply and sanitation coverage in informal communities. We do hope to share the knowledge we gain from this project and replicate its success in other cities in Asia and Pacific.
So in summary, the question that we addressed was, how do you introduce nature-based solution into really tight, high-density environment? And we were able to demonstrate that. We were able to engage with the community to get them to get involved in some of the construction when it doesn't require high technical expertise, but we also then introduced contractors to construct some of the key elements. The access road you see there is actually also there to support a wetland system. And this used to be the access road, and this is what was built. And you can see to the right that we actually start to build a wastewater wetland system that provides an alternative to the sanitation systems that are out there, which is clearly not working because of the frequency of flooding and also the high water table in this area. Another picture of what it's like when it's flooding and how the intervention now provide flood-free access, but also the infrastructure for good sanitation services. This was the picture taken in October 2019, another picture of what it was before and what it's become. And there are many dimensions to this, and this is just highlighted in that in this intervention, rainwater harvesting, wastewater treatment, a biofilter for gray water treatment, safe access in terms of flood management, providing stormwater drainage, introduction of pressure sewer to enable sewage to be pumped into those wetland systems above the flood level so that they can operate well. And so one of the things that we have been able to show is that the concept of water sensitive cities, that our city is a water supply catchment that we can harness the water resource for, that we can design and transform our cities to provide ecosystem services, and that we need to engage with our community to ensure ongoing operation maintenance of these systems are fundamental to how we can actually transform cities to become more sustainable, resilient, and ultimately livable. So I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Tony. I think you just used 4 minutes of extra time, and that's good. Okay, now, shall we use some minutes to have questions or remarks from the audience, or shall we leave that until the Q&A session? What do you say? Okay. If you don't have anything at the moment, we will leave that to the question and answer session. Now, I'm calling Ms. Panjali Sakia. She's from the Swedish Institute of Water, and she will tell us about how we let me read that from here. Okay. So you introduce your topic, and we will be enjoying as we did with the first speaker.
Thank you so much, Kamal. Absolutely. I'm Panchali Sakia. It's a pleasure to be here. I work with the Stockholm International Water Institute. Let me share my screen here. And I'll be sharing some insights of the current trends and scenarios around water and sanitation services in growing cities, and more focused in terms of looking at it from the lens of improving the governance around water and sanitation services in urban spaces. Let me share here quickly some data that you will see from the recently developed progress report around the Sustainable Development Goal 6 indicator and the targets. And we see that there is a lot of countries which are way behind in terms of achieving water and sanitation services for all. And when we look into the specific targets, looking into the drinking water supply, we see that nearly 2.2 billion people still lack safely managed drinking water and services. And when we look specifically in terms of sanitation, still 4.2 billion that lacks safely managed sanitation services. So this is kind of like huge in terms of when we see that there are uncertainties that comes in, right? And we saw in the presentation from Dr. Tony Wong in terms of climate disasters that really impact communities in both rural and urban spaces, and not having access to adequate water in safe environment, in safe quality, and also affordability is another aspect when we talk about access to this kind of services, which is very essential now, even through the whole COVID-19 pandemic, that we have seen washing of hands, where you need soap and water, right? The facilities in both at the domestic premises and also in public spaces, healthcare facilities and schools are not adequate to be able to meet those health quality standards that WHO has announced during the pandemic. Even when looking into the wastewater, we see less than 50% of the domestic wastewater is safely treated in 24 out of 75 reporting countries, according to the report. And most of these 75 are high-income countries in aspect to that. You will also see the water stress, like in terms of how a majority of the population live in water stress countries. And this is very crucial when we talk about in terms of meeting the daily requirements of water, sanitations, and when we saw of what Dr. Tony Wong had presented about the whole uncertainties around the climate pandemics. Now, when we see really in the progresses that has been made in the water and sanitation services in rural and urban, there has been significant progress made in the urban space, and when it's seen as compared to the rural. But we also see that the data also shows that there is huge gap and huge intra-urban inequalities around having access to services in the slums, like we saw in the presentation that Dr. Tony Wong has shared, that urban slum areas still lack this kind of provisions around services. And also Kamal had mentioned about a lot of households sometimes are not able to be connected through piped connection, be it for several reasons, because of the service, poor services, or because of the terrain that you cannot connect those households with piped connections. So this is one of the crucial aspects that I wanted to focus here is, even though it has progressed well when compared to rural, there is still a lot of hurdles that needs to be met and needs to be reduced when we talk of the urban space in improving the water and sanitation services. And there has been open defecation practice, not just in rural, but even in urban spaces. We have seen in most of the countries that they still practice open defecation that impacts not just the environment and health, but also the wider when we talk of the sustainability around meeting the climate goals, right? Like open defecation, emitting carbon emissions through that results in impacting the wider environment and the ecosystem. So this is some of the key aspects that I wanted to focus in terms of the fully managed services. In urban areas, we also see when we talk of the sanitation facilities, it's mostly poor shared facilities. For example, in slums, you see community managed toilet facilities are there, which are very for example, there has been some studies done by World Bank in the Asia Pacific region, where they showed that nearly 40% in Papua New Guinea, they had noted open defecation in urban spaces and poorly managed shared sanitation facilities. And this is evident even in other countries as well. In Ethiopia, you also see a wide division when you look into the wealth aspect. Wealthier households in urban areas were 4 times more likely to have piped water connections on premises as compared to the poor households. Even when you look into countries like Ghana, there are open defecations that has increased from 17% to 21% more for the poorest areas as of in 2016, this was reported. So these are some of the challenges that urban spaces still face. And we look into looking into how this could be improved. And one of the key areas that we see is that definitely there are infrastructures that needs to be, investments needs to be made in terms of improving infrastructures. But one of the biggest hurdles that we see around this is the gaps around water governance. And this is one of the studies launched by the OECD on looking into the water governance in cities, where you will see some of the key gaps that has faced by the countries in terms of improving the water and sanitation services, where the gaps in the governance around the water and sanitation. So you look into here are some examples around the lack of capacities, right? Some of the capacities that the water surveys and water utilities they usually face, either in terms of the human resources, the managerial capacities, or in terms of financial capacities, also in relation to monitoring and evaluation. And there is also evidence where in terms of the water utilities phase is when in dealing with emergency situations, right, during climate disasters, the contingency plan, how to develop those in collaborative manner with both in cooperation with the water resources to understand the wider impact with the disaster department. So there has been certain gaps noted around that. Even access to information, for example, there was one discussion during a workshop we had, and I'll shortly show the implementation and piloting there. In Miami, there was a discussion around, it's not just about collection of data and information around the water resources allocation, the water resources availability, but sometimes it's also about dissemination of those information to the right stakeholder, to the right decision maker in the right time. So there are also evidences in terms of dissemination of lack of dissemination of the data, in addition to the lack of data availability. In primarily, I want to focus here around the gaps around accountability that we see in relation to weak stakeholder engagement. And we had seen this evident from the piloting in Indonesia, seen how this cooperation across the communities, across the water service providers, the wash service providers, plus the wider water management in the city really is important in terms of making this kind of intervention successful and sustainable. So this is something very crucial when we look into accountability, having this accountability mechanism across different service providers with the users, the communities, and with the policymakers in an environment. How is the feedback system, for example, between the service providers and the users, whether they're able to make the complaints if there is anything that has gone wrong in relation to, say, the services not reaching the people. So how is the complaint mechanisms those are ensured? So these are some of the capacity gaps that has been evident while mapping around 48 countries in this study by the OECD. And here I want to bring focus in terms of what needs to be looked into when we try to find out what are the existing gaps on governance that a city might face and how to resolve those. And there are some of the tools and frameworks that I'll be presenting shortly that will help you to understand how this could be really helping cities and the stakeholders to map some of those existing gaps. Here I want to bring focus in terms of looking into the whole governance arrangement in when we look into the water and sanitation sector, right? The line ministries are kind of have to really imply in terms of having some of the functions ensured to in place to ensure that the services are provided to people adequately in affordable manner. And these are, we define as the core water governance functions. And to create that enabling environment of improved governance, it is essential to look into these functionalities, how these functions are performed. And here I'm showing you a graph in terms of looking into some of the key water governance functions that usually occurs in the wash sector. And this may vary across different countries depending on the development stage of these functions and in the context of that respective country. But crucially looking into one is very evident, we know policy and strategies needs to be built. How is the coordination mechanism across different stakeholders? How is the service delivery? Rules and regulations set up or not? How is the accountability mechanisms that I had briefly talked about? How is the budgeting, financing, the monitoring and planning done? In terms of also looking into capacity development, I shared this OECD studies showed that there is a huge gap in terms of capacities across the water services providers. So these are some of the key aspects that needs to look into. But beyond this are also some of the institutional structural factors that really impact on the water sector when we look at the national level, right? The decentralization systems. If in a country where there is a decentralized system, how is the multi-level governance coordination mechanism happening? How it is in terms of the public finances management, how it is the funds been allocated for the wash sector or not. And this is not limited primarily alone to when we talk of the wider wash sectors. Inequalities are also in terms of funding allocation is also seen within the wash sector when we look into drinking water supply versus sanitation and hygiene. So we see a huge gap in terms of financial investments, not looking into sanitation, improved sanitation facility and the governance around that. And when we specifically look into other image here, you see into the urban context where we looked into, and Dr. Tony Wong had mentioned that sometimes cities needs to look into the local context, right? Looking into how you can harness the water resources and the availability within that urban space. But we also see that in a lot of the cities, they're still dependent on water sources beyond in basins and reservoirs that are beyond the capacity and they're beyond the administrative boundary of that city, right? For example, in Cape Town, like nearly 90% of the water comes from upland surface waters that is beyond, that lies beyond the administrative boundary of the city. Even in Amman, for example, a lot of the dependence looks into the transboundary level of dependency, where you are dependent on neighboring countries for water, the Jordan River, which is also a transboundary river. So sometimes a city sits in one or multiple basins, so dependent on water resources that comes beyond that space. So when we look into that, it as a sphere of control, like it's beyond the control, sometimes beyond the control of the water and sanitation sector within that urban space. And also there are sectors that may impact, for example, energy sector, the agriculture and food supply industries that really impact the urban water and sanitation services. But it's important that it's kind of, there is a coordination, there is a cooperation that is needed. For example, while doing some of the field work in Amman in one of the project intervention, the team really found that during a disaster or flood, it was seen that when the energy supply was stopped, the water sanitation supply and everything, the disaster management information system had really shut down. So sometimes this coordination in across different sectors is very crucial to look into. So that is where the sphere of influence really comes into when we look into urban water sector. And then you have the wider context based, the structural effect, right? The implication of the demographic changes, the migrations from rural to urban areas, the whole cultural aspect, the economic aspect, how the country is doing in terms of economic. So that also influences an urban water sectors. To really understand the practicality of how this governance really works in the urban areas, and also in terms of what needs to be done when we say about improving governance, at CV, we have developed this framework that helps practitioners, policymakers, and even researchers to understand how to unpack water governance, how to really apply water governance in practice. And this is where I want to really focus on when I was talking about the functions, right? It's not just about ensuring that you have those core functions in place, the policies, the coordinations, financing. We all know these are usually in place in many countries. But it's not just about having that in place, but also how these functions are performed. How is the policy and strategy designed? How is it implemented? Whether it is participatory or not, whether the decision makers, policy maker who is designing the policy and strategy accountable for those that they are designing for. Even in terms of looking into the financing, how is the financing aspect, looking into whether there is transparency or not. The procurement processes that say a water utility might call, how is that process really inbuilt, whether the bidding processes are announced openly and transparently, or whether it is competitive or not. So it's very important in terms of ensuring that these functions are performed in a certain manner so that you are able to achieve those outcomes around sustainability and resilience. Another example I would really share here in terms of the early warning systems, right? There has been a lot of studies, there has been a lot of interventions that talk community-based early warning systems, which is very crucial that you engage the communities, you engage the user, and for that it is important that there is meaningful engagement and participation from the users. Their perspective, their needs and demands are actually reflected on those policy making, designing of the early warning systems. So this is something very crucial when even looking into the water utilities, right? The disaster management sometimes that manages the early warning systems needs to provide adequate information, timely information around flood and droughts to the water service utilities and water service providers so that they can be adaptive, they can be responsive when needed. So it's very important that these attributes, what we call, are really in place in terms of adapting to some of those aspects around performing these functions to ensure the changes. Even, for example, if we say we need to change behaviors around use of efficiency, for that it's very important to ensure that we get the aspect around the users from, and this is not limited to the domestic users, right? It also applies to the businesses, the industries, that is important to look into how we need to build the capacities around them in terms of improving the accountability of all these stakeholders to improve water use efficiency in the urban space. So this is this whole dynamic around this framework that helps to provide an understanding on how to implement water governance in practice and how you can really ensure that the interventions that are made looks into this wider aspect of governance and enabling environment in improving water services and also the wider water management in urban spaces. Another aspect here we wanted to focus is the values and aspiration that influences this whole process, right? For example, in indigenous ecological knowledge, the cultural beliefs that is associated sometimes with hygiene practices or with sanitation practices in a country. It's important to also understand those aspects, even in terms of the ethics in a water utility, the professionalism in a water utility that really drives how the designs and implementations strategies are actually made in an environment. So it's very important to really see into the individual and organizational values and aspirations that may impact this whole process around implementing some of these core functions in a certain way to achieve resilience and sustainability. I'll not go much in detail in talking about resilience Dr. Wong had already defined what we mean by resilience, but here I want to bring a focus on a tool very quickly that really will help cities practitioners understand how to improve the water resilience through the lens of governance. So here, in terms of providing the cities, the stakeholders to understand what needs to be done in terms of improving the planning and preparedness, what are the existing gaps, say, for example, in the regulations, what are the existing gaps in terms of financing that are actually putting a hurdle in terms of achieving resilience or in terms of achieving the sustainability goals, is something that will be helping in terms of the wider process that city water resilience approach talks about. And this is something that you might have seen in any project interventions in terms of needing to look from understanding a system to developing an action planning, the monitoring mechanisms are in place, evaluation mechanisms are in place. And here we really wanted to focus in terms of when we talk about understanding the local system, right? Understanding the urban system, how you can harness the local capacities, how you can harness the available resources in that system. And for that, it's very essential to understand and map which are the connecting factors. I will quickly come to that, but before that, I wanted to focus on understanding the system. An example when we talk about the connections, right? How are the drainage system connected to reservoirs, how it is connected to the natural systems and wetland, how it is connected to a surface water, to a basin, to a river. So this is very essential for urban stakeholder to understand how the system is connected, both naturally and in terms of infrastructure related. And this is where I want to focus in terms of looking into when a disaster occurs, for example, a flood, which are the assets that gets impacted and who are the stakeholder who is managing those aspects around operational of those assets. So this is the digital tool that City Water Resilience Approach presents, which helps the stakeholder to understand the urban water systems and also map the stakeholders, identify who are the stakeholders they need to engage in and how they need to engage in terms of when there is a disaster, when there is a flood, when there is a drought. And this is where it becomes essential in terms of providing stakeholders with this kind of innovative tools that can help them in mapping those stakeholders and also gathering those stakeholders in terms of identifying some of those aspect around the gaps that I was mentioning about. And this is where it comes the second aspect of assessing the urban water resilience, when you're trying to find out the gaps, existing gaps that I was mentioning about in relation to the wider water governance and in terms of managing the ecosystem and infrastructure and health and well-being of the communities in urban space. And this is where, after you have started mapping the stakeholders, you gather along in a multi-stakeholder environment and you try to access the gaps through this assessment tool that looks into a wider and holistic pictures. And you will see here 4 dimensions that we mentioned here in the framework is leadership and strategy, planning and finance, infrastructure, ecosystem, and health and well-being. And there are specific targeted goals within each of the dimensions that will help a city to achieve those, reduce those, identify those gaps and also achieve those goals in terms of improved resilience in the sector. There are specific resilience indicators that has been developed within the framework, and I think I'll share briefly when I'm talking about the implementation in Cape Town and Miami. Given the time limitation here, I will quickly jump here talking about some of those findings using those indicators. So in both the cities, in the multi-stakeholder arrangement, the stakeholders gathered together to assess some of those existing resilience gaps. And water governance was key component when we talk about looking into leadership and strategies, how is the coordination across the basin, how is the regulations and accountability, and also looking into the wider aspect of asset management, effective disaster response, how is the infrastructure design, whether it is water sensitive designs or not. So those kind of indicators have been designed that helps in terms of assessing this resilience gaps. And this is scored from a scale of 4 to optimal, from a scale of 1 to 5, where cities are able to identify. And these are some of the results that you will see, the red marks, which are lowest score, and the more fair is the yellow ones, and the greener ones are more, which is more looking into optimal conditions. And we found that a lot of the gaps also lied across in terms of engaging communities in the decision-making processes, and also looking into some of the aspects around, for example, in Miami, it was talked about that the responses and preparedness that were made, the planning that were made in relation to hurricane disaster, which is very commonly occurred hazard in Miami, it was seen that the response and preparedness were well in place. But when looked into the newly emerged uncertainties around coastal erosion, the sea level rise, were something that the city was also lagging behind. Even in Cape Town, when we looked into specifically discussions around flood, the city is also facing challenges around flood. So when looking into financial mechanisms, when looking into how the budget's allocations were there, flood risk mitigations and flood risk management were lacking those kind of fundings to be able to improve the planning and preparedness around the disasters. So when a city faces multiple hazards, multiple disasters, it's important to really look into how this preparedness and planning are done across different disasters, right? For example, this planning and preparedness measure for a flood will be very different from the planning and preparedness when we talk of managing and mitigating risk around drought. So this is something that was discussed around in the workshops. And another quick example here, I wanted to focus here when we talk about in terms of some of the conservation aspect that we're mentioning about when we talk of improving sanitation is also needed is the cooperation between the water and sanitation service sector stakeholders with the water resources management, right? We saw that there is the Miami-Dade County Water and Sewage Department has been working towards this project on water conservation program in enhancing and improving residents and businesses to take active role in water use efficiency. And towards this, it's very much important that water and sanitation stakeholders interact and talk about with the water resources management in terms of identifying the availability of resources within that local space, and in terms of looking into that aspect. In Cape Town, we had seen during the drought, the city was also trying to look for alternate water sources during that situation where there were a lot of investments being made in terms of looking for alternate sources, and this had also resulted in increasing in water tariff, which was also difficult for poorer households to afford this kind of services during that kind of situation. So it's crucial that this kind of information, this kind of planning and preparedness, this kind of measures around budgeting of resource planning in terms of interventions, it's important that there is a coordination across these stakeholders, and also in relation to not just limiting to the urban space, also upstream and downstream. Sometimes you see the impacts are also upstream and downstream. The activities and interventions made in an upstream city or upstream area will have an impact on the downstream area. So it's very crucial. This needs to be looked into, and this is something that was identified in City of Miami, looking into how coordination aspect is essential, not just improving the stakeholders within the city, which was doing quite well in Miami, but in terms of looking into the upstream stakeholder, it was still lagging behind. Another key aspect I wanted to focus in terms of looking into how this had contributed in strengthening and informing these strategies around for both the cities is the action planning that were looked. So after doing the assessment, the gaps identification, the stakeholders also got together in terms of identifying solutions. What could be the key solutions that they need to look into to improve the governance, improve the resilience in the cities? For example, in Cape Town, here are some examples that sites looking into a new platform empowering each informal settlement to influence the city's budget setting processes. So this was also looked into improving the services in the informal settlements. And for that, it's important to empower not just the communities, but also the service provider with the data, right? With the informations around what are the needs and demand in the informal settlement in urban slums. And Dr. Wong had pointed out a very crucial point there when we talk about putting this kind of interventions and planning and processes, urban spaces like in slums. It's often looking into the whole paradigm around having structures around how it is in the rural areas, right? So it's very important to understand the context. How is the situation? How is the environment? Whether or not the services will be affordable or not. There are a lot of easy way of responding. Sometimes it's setting up a shared facility and toilet without a lock system. So it's kind of like whether it is acceptable or not. So this brings in the whole wider human rights to water and sanitation aspect of looking into not just accessibility, but also affordability, also looking into the acceptability, looking into culture and norms, and also looking into the quality of services, and also looking into the quality of water when we talk of the services. So these are some of the aspects that were also discussed during the discussions of action planning, and that had helped inform the resilience strategies around both for Miami and Cape Town. In Miami, they have been working around this 305 resilience strategies. So this kind of multi-stakeholder assessment had helped inform the water component of that resilience strategy. And in Cape Town, who had recently launched a water strategy, and that talked of both achieving water resilience and water sensitive city in the strategy, had also kind of acknowledged that this action plans that had been developed through this assessment process will also be included in the implementation and budgeting plan of that city water strategy. I'll stop it here, and we'll look forward to more questions around that, and also try to put some link around the papers that I had mentioned during my presentation. Thank you so much.
Doctor,
You're muted, Dr. Kamel.
you're muted.
Okay, sorry. Panchali, thank you very much for your introduction and for your work. I praise your work, actually. You have been doing very good work with Siwi, and also the work done by Tony Wong gave us a very good insight of what cities should be doing to maintain resilience, to maintain a kind of water supply and sanitation facilities for the whole communities in cities. And we know that many cities lack these facilities, and work is being done to overcome that shortage. Shall we go to have two small questions?
Yes, please. Just before that,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, okay. Just before starting this webinar, I try to explain that this webinar will be more interactive. Okay. Now I see on the screen Sarah. Sarah, welcome. She is very close friend of mine. Sarah, do you hear me? Sarah asked a question, and I know Sarah very well, and she's an author on urban design through the world, and she works United Cities and the local governments and the voice and network of cities. And I would ask a question to Sarah before if she can speak about the role of local governments in sustainable urbanization and the finance. Sarah, you're muted.
Okay, I have to take out the mic. Do you hear me now?
Yes, clearly.
Okay. No, thank you very much, Dursun, for giving me the floor. And sorry, I connect this way. I think the presentations were excellent of Tony and also of Panchali. And I'm working at United Cities and Local Governments, so we look very much on the political side of the governance, actually. I think in the point of governance, it calls my attention that you do not speak so much on the local authorities, on the role of local authorities. So this means the mayors, the councillors, those who take decisions. And I think it's very important to involve them because actually they do the politics on the local ground and on the local side. And now what we can see here from United Cities and Local Government, I think a general move or a general trend is towards remunicipalization of water enterprises. So as this is a seminar on hydropolitics, I think the points you make, the challenges of waters in cities, in city governance are every day more. I think both Tony with his projects and also with this, the way how to appreciate water, and also Panchali on the challenges that come to cities and to territories, both will require local governance, which looks into how to implement strategies from the local ground, because not every city can have assistance or can have a to organize neighborhoods. So the financing of access to all, in particular to urban poor, what has been observed is that the privatization of water enterprises is often of course brought with private actors. So this means they deal water as business, and the municipalities are the ones who then need to subsidize in order to ensure access to water and to drinking water. And this conflict is resolved very, very diverse in the different countries, from the South African model in Cape Town, where you have a minimum water for everybody, and then the different tariffs to actually punish bigger consumers. But this the part where also this water governance that will require every time more finance, because we need to look at the sources, we need to give more subsidies in order to keep people healthy. Water is more precious, is a limited source. So how do you, or I think we could look together a little bit on this piece, because if the water enterprises and water management is completely in private hands, then the poor will not be, it will be very difficult for local governments, because they don't create incomes, they have no fees, and they don't have any financial ability to do water governance in practice. So I would like to know your views on that, and thank you, Dursun, for giving me the floor.
Welcome.
Jean-Louis? How about Jean-Louis?
Mr. Tony, Professor Tony, do you want to give a hint on that?
You know, the water in many parts of the world is viewed as an essential, the provision of water is viewed as an essential service. And so while there may be, well, in Australia, the water utilities are much more corporatized than privatized. They are state-owned enterprises that operate under a corporatized entity. So that I think that is actually looking at water not just as a commodity, but really as an essential elements of livability in many aspects as well. But my view is that you know, privatization, as long as it is actually has got a very firm terms of reference that the government issue those private license to, our role is really to ensure that the scope of services to be provided for the license and the pricing policies are managed in a way that promotes fit for purpose use of water that is not necessarily just as a commodity, but actually looking at sustainable use of water. The concept of promoting circular economy is now gaining popularity even amongst some private companies that I'm aware of, because water can be used multiple times now, and that itself can actually can lead to significant reduction in unit costs. So as a principle, I'm not in favor or against privatization of water, as long as the terms of services are well articulated.
Okay, thank you. I think we are a little bit over time. Can we go to Mr. Dursun for his presentation?
Yeah, but before that, I think Jean-Louis will try to say something.
Jean-Louis. Okay.
Oh, later, but not now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can I quickly share a point to Sarah's question there?
Yes, please.
Quickly share about, we did this study around water integrity on improving collaboration of public-private partnerships in improving water and sanitation services, and I'll share that with you briefly. But I also wanted to bring, sometimes it's when we talk about service provision, it's not limited to just public and private. We also have the informal service providers, and that makes the situation much more worse. And that is why it's very crucial, and Dr. Wong really pointed out a very crucial point there, articulating the provisions clearly, and that is where it is very essential to map the accountability gaps there of the service provision, how it is when an external service provider comes in, how it is when an informal service provider comes or private sector comes in, and that really improves in terms of how it is enforced, right? There is a clear roles and responsibility defined. They are answerable to the users, they're answerable to the policymakers and vice versa, and also in terms of enforcements and compliances to the regulations around that is imposed in a country. So this is very crucial in terms of mapping some of the service provisions and gaps on accountability, and also looking into the proficiency and improving water integrity, and also the anti-corruption, reducing the corruption in the sector as a way of improving integrity.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have to go on, Dursun. Please
Okay.
have the seat, have the microphone.
Okay. You hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
My microphone is open always.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Panchali. Thank you, Tony. Great presentation. Sarah, okay, we need your help because of you. You write it down that water is a human right. Yes, I agree with you as Hydropolitics Academy, but we will try to find some ways. Water is a human right, as everybody knows, as you know, as we know, but how we can achieve this one from the white paper to the practice. And therefore, you touched the point that very important, and I will try to explain something to you what is happening in Istanbul. Istanbul is a huge city, as you know, and you know Istanbul very well, Sarah. And I will try to give some explanation about Istanbul, what happened, and where we are going to solve the problems. And I would like to get your idea, especially Tony and the Panchali. What can we do after my presentation, which I will put the current situation and the future plan on the table. I would like to get your idea what can be done. Okay, let me very fast. I will try to be very fast. Yes, I would like to talk about emerging threats, water and sanitation service in Istanbul. And Istanbul, as you know, is a huge city, and we see that the Istanbul population is larger than the more than 20 individual countries of the European Union. It's about 15.5 million. And Istanbul water and sanitation needs what we will talk about this question, in which way is the best way, a nature-based solution for Istanbul. And it is the population is growing very rapidly, increasing very rapidly, and also the water demand. And you see the watershed in Istanbul, and this is the municipality borders, and most of the watershed is into these municipality borders, and that means that it is very prone to be contaminated, and not too easy to prevent. Okay. And these are the location of the dams that supply drinking water to Istanbul. As you see, Istanbul, this is Asian side, this is European side, and Istanbul has 7 big reservoir which serving it as a drinking water supply. Okay, and it's about 100% of water resources in Istanbul are surface water. And briefly, I would say that energy-intense water supply in Istanbul, and it is very much depends on the interbasin water transfer. It is the characteristics of the Istanbul water supply is that. And there is another characteristics which is very interesting. Istanbul, if we call that in Istanbul East and Istanbul West, Istanbul East has the population about 35%, and the Istanbul West, the population rate is 64.5%. But it means that the water resources are evenly distributed through Istanbul. Also, I would say about 60% of the water in Istanbul is on the Asian side. It is water-rich side, the water-poor side, but the population is contrary. And the development is contrary as well. It's giving a dynamic problems to Istanbul water, not only water and sanitation management system or plan, but also the whole Istanbul. I mean, in terms of the development of the living standards in the city. You see here, it is daily water use in European side is about 2 million cubic meters, and the daily water use in Asian side is 1 million cubic meters per day. And the population is again 10 million in Istanbul West and 5.5 million in Istanbul East. And due to the increase in population and change in precipitation rates, the need for water has increased in recent years. Therefore, the idea of the Melan project was developed in the beginning of the 20s. It was aimed to bring water from Melan Creek, which is about 180 kilometers away from Istanbul. The first water in Istanbul was launched in 2007. With the Melan project, Greater Melan project is a large-scale, also interbasin transfer project that provides domestic and industrial water requirements of Istanbul for 2040. And if you look at the Istanbul annual rainfall, and we see that from time to time it is under the average level in some years. And also due to the increase in population and the change in precipitation rates by years, Istanbul faced water shortage threat in 2007, 2014, but partially completed the Melan project, helped to Istanbul to overcome these critical periods. Once again, in 2019, annual total rainfall was lower than the mean values in Istanbul. This meteorological drought period has continued in 2020, as you see here. And Istanbul entered the new water year, 2021, with very low water storage rate in the dam's reservoir. As you see here, these are the long-term mean rainfall. I mean, the total monthly total rainfall in Istanbul in 2020. But the monthly rainfall was very much lower than the long-term mean rainfall during these 4 months. But in contrary to expectations, meteorological drought period has also continued in last 4 months of the last year. Contrary to expectations, as the monthly total precipitation continued to fall, the amount of water in the dams decreased by 20% in total. Fortunately, the expected precipitation started with a delay of 3 months, and the amount of water in the dams started to increase, as you can see here. We were approaching to day zero, just like as we saw in Cape Town. And really, it is unfortunate that this is the rainy period, but we didn't expect. But most of the experts were saying that okay, we are expecting that the rain will be higher than before. Fortunately, it happened, and we get some water from the rain and to the reservoir. Okay, within this population and water use trend in Istanbul, Istanbul is failing to water shortage. If annual rainfall is under average level during 2-year period, you see here, here, here, and here. But yeah, as you can see this graph, we see that although the amount of rainfall in various years until 94 here, and the population is not so high. In 94, the population of Istanbul is 8.5 million. It was 8.5 million. Therefore, this lower annual rainfall didn't create any big problems. But after 94, as you see here, the increasing population rate in Istanbul, now it is 15.5 million. After 94, the water shortage occurred in some years, in 94 and also 2007. Here it is the lowest value last 50 years, and also last year. And
Mr. Dorson, I think we have to go a little bit faster because I don't know how the audience do you have time to take another half an hour? Can you just raise your hands if you are ready to that? No.
Okay. However, I will be faster now. However, in recent years, it's observed that the occupancy rates at the dams have decreased slightly in April. In other words, if the occupancy rates in the dams increased up to 81, and it was observed that this accumulated water volume tended to decrease over the previous years. This is a kind of indication that we have to be careful in terms of water and sanitation measures which we will take. And during this drought period, deficiency of water budget has always occurred in Istanbul West. The deficiency in water budget of Istanbul West was provided from Melen and the Yeşilçay system. And the water was transferred to Europe side with 6 meters diameter tunnel that goes 135 meters below the sea level, and crossing the 2 continents with a capacity to transfer 3 million cubic meters of water per day. Actually, the Melen and Yeşilçay system has partially served to Istanbul since 2007. Since then, most of the years, 1/3 of annual water demand was supplied by Melan system, Melan and Yeşilçay system to Istanbul. But last year, this rate was increased as of about 50%. In fact, the last part of the Melan system, Melan Dam, is expected to be completed by the end of 2017. But it would have a huge storage capacity as of 700 million cubic meters that equals the 75% of total capacity of all Istanbul dams. And in fact, dam construction to a large degree was completed, but due to the cracks as a result of insufficient ground reinforcement work, the dam couldn't retain water. The dam would start retaining water 2 years ago, but cracks made that possible. And the organizations related with the water infrastructures has announced that, has stated that Melan Dam will be strengthened till 2023. Now we are waiting for to put the water in the reservoir if this problem is solved. But till now, Melan has served us very much, but we see that due to the Melan Dam is not able to store water for the time being, water need to be pumped from the river regulator next years. This is the regulator which is helping Istanbul water supply very much since last 2 or 3 years. And we will see that the waters is taken from the Great Melan River from here, and they pumped 196 meters, and after that it goes to the Europe. The water travel will take at least 25 hours from here to there. And of course, we use a large number of pumps, each one having a maximum pressure height of more than 200 meters. And total pressure height we need for Istanbul water supply is about 300 meters, which is, and this pump total pressure height is about 300 meters, and we transfer 0.2 million cubic meter day from Istanbul East to Istanbul West. And the new plan for Istanbul water supply has announced by the by the mayor of Istanbul, Mr. Ekrem İmamoğlu. He said that although it is getting higher, I mean the water level in the dams is getting higher in the February of 2021, he said that we must implement water demand management rules. It is just time to start. But I don't think that this order has been accepted and in practice. And also there is another challenge for the water and the sanitation management in Istanbul. It is an Istanbul Canal. And while Istanbul is waiting for the completion of the Melan Dam, to avoid the threats of the possible dry periods in the coming years, another challenge come out. What is that? Istanbul Canal will be implemented. If it will be implemented, it will largely and seriously affect the Istanbul wastewater supply plan. And the many existing water infrastructures and facilities will be disabled and rebuilt due to the construction of the Istanbul Canal. In addition, it is estimated that the additional population that will come to the residential areas in the zoning plans will reach 1.5 million people. And of course, this will require more water treatment and more water supply. And also taking into account this water demand, additional dams planned in both sides. But where it is again the other part of the Istanbul, but I mean that the Asian part of Istanbul. And what it will bring us, and the additional water potential is about 422 million cubic meter here in the Istanbul East. But if you develop the water potential here only, you get to 120 million cubic meters per year. It means that increasing water demand here and the water supply management, increasing water supply here in this part, from this part. And if we explain the sustainable water management, sustainable water manager will try to strike a balance between the available water resources and the demand, but we have to define the available water resources again. If these water resources from 100 or 200 kilometers away from the city center, if it is available water resources using the high tech, of course, in every case, you can get this water from there to the city. But can we explain that these water resources must be available for the growing cities? And this is another case. And not only in Istanbul, but also several metropolitan cities in the world, transferring their additional water demand from other river basins are common, as you know. But this global trend likely to create water allocation disputes between cities to us and the regions. That means that in addition to international hydropolitics, subnational hydropolitics will be needed in future. And another challenge is climate change in the river basin, which Melan Dam was located. And as you see, it is about 40 years data. The precipitation is going lower and the decreasing, and the temperature is increasing in this part of the geography. And before concluding, I would share what we learned from this lesson in Istanbul to us. Istanbul sets a good example to the challenge faced in water supply in heavily populated cities. Water supply management policy created a rapidly growing demand and massive intervention water transfer project, which is called Melan project. I worked myself this project when I was in the director in State Hydraulic Works. And what we learned as a lesson from this case, right-in-time measures in water management are vital to manage future risks. And also problems caused by lack of implementation of water demand management could be compensated by some expensive engineering solutions, but I think that there won't be some solutions environmental friendly. And water demand management need to be implemented when water is available, not in the shortage periods. Okay, if surrounding water resources potential is always available to be used for growing cities, making a balance between water resources and human water demand can never be achieved. And even though Istanbul has had water supply problems periodically, the sustainable water governance to Istanbul has not been the subject of scientific and innovative management concepts. The most important reason for this has been the policy of providing water to the rapidly increasing population. The Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality has tried to meet the water demand of the increasing population with only supply management concept. It resulted water transfer from other river basins with higher cost. In Istanbul, rising water demand and supply management trends point towards unsustainable use of water. This paradigm needs to be shifted. And the paradigm shift, why? Because new project came into the site, Istanbul Canal, I explained to you. And the meteorological drought period continued to affect seriously. And smart technologies and new concepts have been already developed in the world. And the water for livability, as Tony mentioned, approach is available anymore if we are careful for the future of the city. And we are responsible for the future of city, not only city, but of course the people who live there. Water for livability, not for life, is important. What to do? This is my last slide. And considering innovative concepts we, as Hydropolitics Academy of Turkey, are supporting, recommending that Istanbul water and sanitation and governance can be replanned as East and West Istanbul water management to use the concept reuse, reduce, recycle, recover. Okay, thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Dursun. Actually, I always enjoy while listening to you, because you have a big treasure of experiences in relation to water and water resources, especially in Turkey. Can I go ahead right away and give my presentation? I will try to be within the 15 minutes given to us originally, and I will ask all the participants if you are kind enough to write your questions in a written form, give it in the chat section. If it's not possible for you to continue with us after the 2 o'clock, which is the original time of the webinar. So, give me the floor, please.
Yes, you can share your screen. I mean, I stopped the sharing.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, now.
Yeah, okay. We will have this as a presentation. Okay. So water management in Greater Amman, Jordan. Greater Amman, we call Amman Greater Amman because in 1987 it was created by the amalgamation of all the municipalities around the city, because the city was those places became a continuation of the urban area and urban spread. So we did a plan by that time, and we thought that this plan has to be comprehensive, taking care of all aspects of municipal work, including management. So the management was changed into a Greater Amman municipality. Okay, Amman is an ancient city. It is said that one of the oldest inhabitation places in the world were in Amman, and that is the site of Ain Ghazal. Maybe you heard about it, and it was called the City of Waters at one time. And this stream here was running through the city. I used to catch fish over there when I was a child, but now it is no more there, and it is covered with a culvert, and it is, but we are having problems as we did in 2015. We had a big flood because all the areas which were the replenishing recharge area of the watershed were built with roads and concrete buildings, and water is no more collected in the aquifer in a sustainable way. Okay. I want to touch on urban planning. There were plans developed for Amman, and this is Amman here, as you see. It's the blue color here is the urban actual buildings, and the rest are the area which is still vacant, and not very much has been left in the lands surrounding the city. But it is not worth mentioning that the first plan for Amman in 1950s, I think 54, 55, tried to protect the recharge areas of the stream by creating these green fingers. And in the later plans, I think buildings took over and it was already built. So in 1987, this was the plan I was directing at the time. We tried to make the city more condensed to prevent it is crawling on the outer sides of the agricultural land and the recharge areas of the aquifer in the outer skirts of the city. The city's population at that time was 1 million when we did the plan, and it was expected to be 2 million by the year 2000. By the year 97 or 2000. And but the city developed into the population of 4 million due to migration from the surrounding countries of Jordan because of the political conflicts over there. In 2010, the municipality of Greater Amman prepared a new plan for another 20 years, and they discovered that there is still ample capacity in the already zoned and open for building areas of the city, and this for this reason they kept the same area and they called it the building or the development envelope of Amman. The rest was intentionally left without any urban development. And actually, the potential for the zoned areas is to bear a capacity of about 10 million inhabitants, and we still have 4 after 25 years. Okay. Okay. The city of Amman, do you see this picture here? Every house in the city has a water tank on the rooftop, because water is supplied once in a week for 12 to 18 hours. And all the citizens of Amman have to manage the water which is in the tank for the remaining parts of the week. Water is transferred to Amman actually because of the aquifer and the local resources were not sufficient. So water is brought from areas such as far as 50 to 70, even 320 kilometers away. Water quality is monitored, and there is a good work done in this respect, I have to say. About 80,000 water and sewage samples are collected and analyzed annually. Water sources are at risk in quantity and quality. Some sources already have RO plants because the quality of the water is not good anymore. These satellite images, this is the DC aquifer, which is about 320 kilometers away from Amman. And this is the Saudi part. There is a lot of agricultural development there in the Saudi part. And the water is not replenishing. It's a fossil water, and they say that sometimes it has even some contamination by radioactive materials. This is the other picture shows the Khirbet Asamra sewage treatment plant. It's a huge sewage treatment plant, one of 3 or 4 in Amman. And before, because the land was available, they tried to they designed it as natural ponds treatment facility, but later on they had to go to mechanical plants, as you see in the picture. Now, Amman water has to be thought of all the time in the integrated way with urban development. So urban design is seen as a future tool to maintain the ecosystem in Amman and try to replenish the watershed. And this is done in the university where I used to work as an urban design instructor. And this area is in the center of Amman. It is the same part which used to be the stream of Amman. And there are even more general recommendations to have urban design solutions to increase the recharge rates. And there is even a plan done for the whole city to develop the vacant lands within the buildings into parks, and it would be a very expensive endeavor for the municipality actually, because land is got very expensive. And these projects are good to think of, but when you come to implementing them, you always confronted with the matter of cost, the public acceptance, the ability of the administrations to go ahead with these projects. There are very good works done for Amman and for Jordan in general. The national water strategy, for instance, have some objectives like resilience water sector, access to safe, affordable, and adequate water supply for all Jordanians, adequate wastewater collection and treatment facilities for cities. And even they go into further detailing and like using the existing technologies of the smart city development. But the major question of Amman is the high rate of population growth and the non-availability of water resources. Even the water resources which are used at the moment are at risk. The administration of Amman's water facilities were in the hands of the municipalities. Later on, they were given to a central government corporation, and since the year 2000, it is given to a consortium of Jordanian and international firms which are running the water. Now, there is a conflict of interest here between these organizations. If you go to water resource management or water demand management, sorry, the private sector owned utility companies wouldn't like it very much because it will reduce their expectations for income. But they are good for the municipality because it enables everybody to have access to a certain good amount of water and become, living in a more reasonable way in the environment of water and sanitation and health. So, sorry, I have to go a little bit fast to give the last speaker some room to also present his case about São Paulo. Thank you very much for listening, and sorry for the fast phase of my speech. Mr.
Leandro.
Leandro.
Yes, Leandro is ready.
Hello.
Hello, Leandro.
Can you share your screen now?
Yes, I'm gonna share my screen now.
I will stop.
You need to stop, Mr. Chairman.
Share, yeah, sorry.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it is great.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to be brief, and I'm talking about a little bit about water and sanitation in the São Paulo Metropolitan region. So here we have the São Paulo Metropolitan region. Here we have Brazil, São Paulo state, and the São Paulo Metropolitan region that you can that is highlighted here. In red, we can see the São Paulo city, and here all other cities from the São Paulo metropolitan region. As you can see, the urban sprawl is very large, and most of it, of course, it's located in the São Paulo city. Well, the São Paulo metropolitan region, it is formed by 39 cities, 22 million inhabitants, being 12.3 million just in São Paulo city. São Paulo is also the largest industrial complex in Brazil, which means high demand for water and large amounts of sewage produced. And here we have the São Paulo State Basic Sanitation Company called Sabesp that manages the water supply and sewage collect the sewage and treat it. So this is the context of São Paulo. Here I'm talking about already the water production system. Here in the São Paulo metropolitan region, we have 7 reservoirs that supply with water, being the largest one, Cantareira, as you can see here, has the largest volume, total volume, and supplies 90 million inhabitants in the São Paulo metropolitan region. I want to highlight that Cantareira is the biggest one because it's formed by 5 different reservoirs. As you can see here on this picture, there's a system interconnecting those reservoirs until here in São Paulo by tunnels. So here, I want to change my screen because I want to show an interactive map. Can you see my screen? The website I'm showing or not?
Yeah, we see that one.
The map, do you see?
And
Here? Or the presentation?
Not the map, presentation only.
Okay. I'm switching because I need to show a website here. Can you see now?
Yeah, right now it's okay, Leandro.
So this map is better because we can contextualize São Paulo metropolitan region. As you can see here, it's in the east side of São Paulo state. Here in yellow, we have the São Paulo metropolitan region. And here we have the 7 reservoirs that supplies with water our region. As I stated before, Cantareira is the biggest one. And it's also the biggest basin area. It comes from, it reaches also Minas Gerais state. So the water comes from a distant, from far distance to Sao Paulo, from 60 kilometers. So this is Sao Paulo, as I told you. And here we have 2 large important rivers that crosses the city. The first one is this one, that is Tietê River, that crosses the city from east to west. And here we have Pinheiros River that crosses the city from south to north. So those 2 are the biggest rivers in São Paulo, most important rivers. And I'm gonna talk about a little bit later about them, but you can see here, they are very large rivers. They are very important, and they have alongside important avenues crossing São Paulo city. And here I want to highlight that, as you can see here, we have another reservoir, which is Belize Reservoir. But as you can see, it's not part of the supply system. I'm talking about why later. But as you can see, it's a big reservoir, which is not used for water supply in São Paulo. Here you can see that Pinheiros River starts from here, from Belize Reservoir, and runs from south to north, as I told you. And here, Tietê, and our 7 reservoirs. Here, this website is interesting because we can see by date how is the water level, what is the amount of water available on reservoir, and now the total volume available is at 58.4%. And our biggest reservoir is only 50% of its capacity available. So in this context, I want to talk about, I'm going back to the presentation now. Sorry for that. But here, Where is my presentation? It's here. Between, so, so this is the Cantareda system, as I talked. Our 7 reservoirs, Cantareda is the biggest one, but it has only 50% of its water available, and it supplies 90 million inhabitants in São Paulo metropolitan region. Now I want to talk about what happened between 2014 and 2016, which was called the water crisis in São Paulo metropolitan region. Here you can see in these pictures what happened to the Cantareda system. It was it was basically dry. Cantareda system collapsed because and it started using its technical reserve from May 2014 to December 2015 to try to supply the population by emergency construction works, pumping the water of the technical reserve to supply the population. Here, I want to talk about how this water crisis was showed on the media. On this study from professors at the University of São Paulo, they analyzed 341 news from a famous newspaper here in Brazil, and the results showed that 81% of the news was about what was being done to manage this crisis, and only 18% was about what were the origins of the crisis. And here they highlight that 25% of the news was about water waste and 18% about reduction on water pressure. And from the 18% that talked about the origins of the crisis, only 8.5% was about the management or about the Sabesp management of water here in São Paulo. So what this study shows is that the media here in Brazil try to convey that the main responsibility relies on citizens, because most of the news was about water waste and reduction on water pressure, and not about how what was the true origin of this crisis. And here, this study also shows the possible causes for this water crisis here in São Paulo. One of the reasons was the overuse of Cantareda system for at least 15 years until 2014. I mean, for 15 years, Cantareda system was overused as the main system supplying São Paulo. Also, changes on land use led to less water infiltration on the Cantareda basin. By 2003, 70% of the basin was considered of anthropic use, being 51% by grazing. That means that water infiltration was sorry. So the water infiltration was became more difficult to happen. Another point was about the population growth versus the water treatment production capacity. Here on this table, we can see that since the 80s, the water treatment production capacity versus the total inhabitants decreased. So, I mean, it's not the water was still available, but the treatment production fell during this period. Another possible cause was that the Sabesp, the state company, changed from public to a publicly traded company in 1995. So this study shows that another possible cause is that water was not anymore a common good, but became seen as a profitable resource. But in this context, I want to talk now a little bit about what is the situation now. The situation now is that Cantareda system is still the main production system, although it has reduced from 9 to 5 million inhabitants supplied. Belize Reservoir that I showed you before is larger than Cantareda, as you can see here. It has 1.2 billion cubic meters of total volume against 982 million cubic meters from Cantareda, but only 9.2% is used from Belize Reservoir by Rio Grande Reservoir. Water losses is still an issue here in São Paulo, is now by 30%, according to the state company. Those 30% is 19% due to leakage and 10.5% due to fraud and or theft. And here I show you that comparing to Brazil, São Paulo, it's okay, but here in Brazil, we have 39% of water losses behind many countries. I'm sorry. And here, pollution is still a challenge. Tietê and Pinheiros rivers in Belize Reservoir. Here, I bring some pictures from this is Pinheiros River. As you can see, it's a large river. Here, for example, it's the financial center of São Paulo. This one is Tietê River. Here we have those big avenues I told you before. And this is the current situation of our two largest rivers. It is still very polluted. And this is a situation that happens especially on summer because we are in a tropical region, so water is abundant. And there's no way to pump this water. So this is what happens on summertime. The avenues are completely blocked. The traffic stops. And the city is in a chaos situation. Here, the Belize Reservoir, as I talked before, is the biggest one in São Paulo, but it's not used for water supply because it's very polluted. Here, you can see the urban sprawl alongside the Belize Reservoir precarious and illegal settlements. And its sewage produced is discharged into the Belize Reservoir. Here, we can see garbage dumping alongside Belize Reservoir. And here, another question is the reversal of Belize River. As I told before, Pinheiros River starts from here and runs from south to north. But trying to prevent those situations, the flooding, they reverse the river. As you can see here, there's a different color from the Pinheiros River. They are reversing the Pinheiros River into Belize Reservoir. That means more pollution being discharged in Belize Reservoir. So, what are the conclusions? Pollution is still a big problem here in São Paulo. We can stop polluting our rivers and reservoirs. As I told you, Belize is the biggest one, but it's not used for water supply. Besides, it's here in São Paulo. They collect water from Cantareira, which is far from here, from 50, 60 kilometers away. The water supply versus demand is still a problem because we do have water available here in São Paulo. It's a tropical country, so São Paulo is located in the Atlantic forest, which is the second most humid region in Brazil, just after Amazon region. So we do have water available, but or it's polluted, or we do not have technical infrastructure to treat those water. And on the crisis between 2014 2016, we had some emergency construction work interconnecting those reservoirs, and even for pump the technical reserve water from those reservoirs. So what I want to stress is that all of these points is considered a management crisis, not a water availability problem, or as I told before, how the media conveys that the problem relies on the citizens, that we need to reduce water waste, and they reduce water pressure on the network, trying to prevent from water losses. So it's been 30 years since 1991 that the São Paulo State Water Law was institutionalized, and it talks about integrated water resources management. But what we really see here in São Paulo region is not an integrated management, because we still have problems with pollution, with water supply, and we still do emergency construction works. So we need to be more, we need more plan management, more plans to be doing to do not have this crisis. So it's not a water crisis, it's a management crisis. And I would say more, we need to move towards an adaptive water resources management. Why? In the face of climate change, whether it's anthropic or not anthropic, we are facing a climate change. So we see that an adaptive approach is more trustworthy approach when it comes to the uncertainty that climate change brings. So that's it. More than integrated, now we need a adaptive water resource management in the face of climate change. So that's it. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leandro. So we had two comprehensive lectures talking about the global problems of water availability and research done in this field. It was very enlightening, and other than enjoying it, I think we benefited from these two lectures very much. Also, the examples or the case studies we try to handle in the given limited time we're also giving some local experiences on these matters, and we think that this is worth to be followed up by all the people concerned. These lectures will be circulated to through the internet to the audience, the larger audience. We will give examples to organizations. But most important than everything else is the will of us, the experts or the so-called experts, to spread the word to the population, to the government, to the community in general, and try to keep these vital issues on the table until we find some reasonable solutions for them. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. And if there are no comments from the audience, I would conclude this webinar. So please, if you have any questions, go ahead and or remarks, go ahead and present them. You can raise your hand directly or through the facility of the program here. We still have 27 participants on the floor, actually, which is very good in this case. Jean-Louis, do you have any remarks? Please open the mic.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. What is very impressive is the importance of climate change everywhere, you know, big cities or smaller or everywhere. And also the pace of urbanization and the demographic development, people going more and more in cities and generally in large cities, you know, so of course it creates problems. What appears also to me the close connection between water planning and urbanization and town planning at municipal and even regional scale, as you could see that water comes from far away, and so you must have a larger scope of territory to plan, and also you need to have time because investments are long to realize and long to finance.
Yeah.
So you have also all the impact of tarification of water. You know, water for all, of course, but who can pay? You know, there is no miracle. And also the connection with water supply, of course, and sanitation, but also with solid waste. Because, of course, sometimes a lot of garbage are everywhere and then create pollution and create flooding, especially with climate change consequences, where you have drought, flooding, storms, you know, more often and more strong. So the connection between town planning and water planning is even more necessary now than ever, you know. And of course, it's difficult over time, not to, but I think it's a priority because so many millions of people are interested in water is life. And you have the quantity, but also the quality, and also the disease, as it was said. You know, that's a lot of children, especially, died, and even old people, you know, are sick. You know, so what is more important than water quantity and quality daily? You know, so I cannot elaborate too much because you have not too much time, but I can send some comments by electronic mail according to what because I thank you very much because it's extremely interesting. And as I wrote to Dirsen, there is an international conference in UNESCO in January.
Yeah, I know.
No, and so it would be very appropriate that you present some of these cases or other cases, you know,
Yes.
in the Middle East and other places. Why not, you know, because dialogue could be positive. And UNESCO is, you know, multicultural and science, education, you know, because social and cultural aspects also must be taken into consideration. You know? It's also interdisciplinary planning and dialogue, you know. So I think this importance of UNESCO conference is up to date for you, if possible,
Yeah.
and maybe we meet there. Maybe we could meet in January in Paris.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Jean-Louis.
Thank you to you. I appreciate your invitations.
You're welcome. You're welcome. May I also give myself the freedom to ask the audience and especially the presenters to, if possible, to convert these speeches into a working paper. And we have a magazine, which is Mr. Dursun is the chief editor of International Water Management Journal. So we can spread the benefits from these good speeches by that way.
I would ask some question to Leandro.
Yeah.
Leandro, do you think that there is some growing disputes between the cities and between the sectors? You said that you are taking from the very far away for the Sao Paulo. And is it creating something, some conflicts between the sectoral use or between the cities? What do you think that? Is there any clue, any signal to protect, to avoid these circumstances?
Well, there is certain discussions about this because São Paulo in 2016 wanted to bring water from the Vale do Paraíba, which is another region here in the state of São Paulo, but Vale do Paraíba supplies the Rio de Janeiro state with water. So it starts certain discussions about the two-state governments. So yes, there is a point, and we have to pay attention to this because we do not manage our reservoirs here in São Paulo and just try to bring water from distance. So yes, there's certain, I wouldn't say a big argument, but there's certain conflict of interest already because of this, especially in the Vale do Paraíba.
Yeah, thank you very much. And now, as far as I understand from the speakers' explanations, as Jean-Louis explained very clearly, it is not a matter of having water as quantity anymore. It is also a matter of quality. And because the water is very far away from the big cities. I made an investigation on it, and I presented this one to the Istanbul Water Symposium. And I know that even more than 200 kilometers, cities are getting water, and also they are creating some difficulties as well as the conflicts between the sectors as well as the cities. So this can also create some problems. Well, not for the quality, but for the quantity, because the water which used for the the drinking water is mostly taken from the groundwater, isn't it, Jean-Louis? groundwater is not as clean as before anymore. I mean, in most of the developing countries are not able to treat their water to give before they're releasing to the water to the stream. Therefore, it is directly affecting to the environment. I mean, as John Lee explained, this is this has a lot of different angles to be considered. One of them is quantity, and another one is groundwater systems. Groundwater is very important for the large growing city supply. For instance, let me give an example from Turkey. In Turkey, at least 50% of the cities' drinking water, can from the groundwater. And so, of course, environmental aspect, quality aspect, management aspect, and the hydropolitics aspect, just lying in front of us. And also the cities, I mean politics, water politics into in the city governance in general, they are trying to supply water as much as possible when the need occurs. This is not the way to manage the water. This is the way to supply water without thinking that what it will be the next. I mean, therefore, the paradigm, to us, paradigm need to be changed. I mean, what we are trying to do for the future water management systems, we are trying only to supply water, and when you open the tap, you need water, yes, but how long and which quality? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to everybody. Really, I appreciate their attendance to this webinar, and we, as Hydropolitics Academy, are trying to put some very special issues in front of the communities to discuss them with a high-level expert. You see, and on the basis of science and technology and information. I mean, scientific information. Therefore, I am very much thankful to the participants as well as the speakers, Janli, Leandro, Filippo, Harun Bey, the other participants. Thank you very much for your attendance. We will try to organize all these webinars with the help of Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman is helping us very much, and also we would like you to follow us and try to contribute as much as possible, because the things, as everybody knows, is really needs to do something deeper, to search something in deep ways. Otherwise, I mean, the only thing, I'm closing my speech, we need multilateral approach, and this multilateral approach is also we need for this one, for different kind of perspectives, and try to collect them and put it in a condition, and try to get the result from them, analyzing from the point of view the subnation, from the point of view the multilateral solution.
Okay, thank you very much, my friend and colleague and president of the Hydropolitics Academy, Mr. Dursun Yildiz. Thank you, everybody, especially the presenters who have done a very good work. And we hope we can see you again in similar works, and we continue to defend the interests of our societies and our humanity. For those who you view are Muslims, happy Eid, which is coming a few days, and for those of you who are Christians, happy Easter, which has passed 4 days ago. And for those of you who belong to other religions, but they belong to humanity, I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
very
you.
much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Welcome.